With our top focus tonight, Jaish-e-Mohammed's chief Maulana Masood Azhar's actions are well documented and the burden of proof is not on India, since countries like US, UK and France are convinced about his terrorist credentials. This was a clear assertion made by Foreign Secretary S. Jaishankar in the first round of upgraded strategic dialogue that was held in Beijing today. On NSG, India told China that it is in a minority in the grouping as majority of NSG members support India's membership bid. On China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, India told China that the initiative violates Indian sovereignty because it runs through Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Here's more on what transpired in the upgraded strategic dialogue today.
Foreign Secretary S. Jaishankar did some plain speak in Beijing on Wednesday on China's belligerence on the issue of imposing a UN ban on Jaish-e-Mohammed chief Maulana Masood Azhar. Addressing the media after co-chairing the first India-China strategic dialogue, the Foreign Secretary hit out at China for demanding solid evidence for getting Azhar banned by the UN, saying that the extent of his actions were well documented and the burden of proof was not on it. The Foreign Secretary said, in the case of Azhar, Jaish itself is proscribed under 1267. So the proof is in the 1267 committee action. In this case, what he has done, extent of his actions are well documented. Speaking in the same vein, he asserted, the proposal in question this time is not moved by us. It is not that the burden of proof is on India to convince. The sponsors seem to be very well convinced. Otherwise, they would not have taken the initiative to move the proposal. China has twice put a technical hold last year at India's bid to list Azhar on the 1267 UNSC Sanctions Committee. In January this year, China put a technical hold on a US move backed by France and UK to achieve the same end. On China's claim that there was no consensus on the issue, the Foreign Secretary attributed the lack of consensus to China not joining it and said that there is overwhelming support in the UNSC committee for India's position. On the NSG issue, the Foreign Secretary said that during the upgraded strategic dialogue, the Chinese side underlined that they were open to India's application for membership, but they had their view of procedures and processes, and these were somewhat different from where we are at the moment and where we think most of the group is at the moment. India also expressed its concerns on its trade deficit vis-à-vis China, saying measures taken by China have not addressed the problem in a substantive manner. Both sides agreed that the joint economic group headed by commerce ministers will meet early to discuss the issue. Under the strategic dialogue umbrella, both sides discussed cooperation in developmental activities, including capacity building in Afghanistan, South-side cooperation on BRICS, whose chair this year is China, and India's impending entry into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Foreign Secretary S. Jaishankar held the restructured strategic dialogue with his Chinese counterpart, who is the Executive Vice Minister in the Chinese Foreign Ministry, Zhang Yesui, on Wednesday. Earlier in the day, Jaishankar met the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and reviewed bilateral, international and regional issues. Discussions took place on specific areas like Afghanistan, multilateral diplomacy, counterterrorism, bilateral relations and nuclear issues. The meetings on Wednesday were preceded by a meeting between S. Jaishankar and the Chinese State Councillor Yang Jiechi on Tuesday. At the conclusion of the strategic dialogue, India said that the visit was useful in conveying to the Chinese side India's concerns and priorities. It remains to be seen if the visit and the upgraded strategic dialogue will help in shoring up ties between India and China and help in resolving differences between the two sides through further consultations in the future. Newsnight Desk, DD News.
So the big question that we're asking tonight is, will India's plain speak with China on Azhar, NSG and CPEC pave the road ahead in India-China relations? To discuss that, we are joined by Professor Shrikant Kondapalli. He is Professor with Center for Chinese Studies in JNU, so he is an expert on China. Welcome, Professor Kondapalli, to Newsnight. India has minced no words today on the terrorist credentials of Maulana Masood Azhar, saying that his actions are well documented and the onus or burden of proof is not on India because countries like US, UK, France, etc. are also on board. They too have made independent initiatives to get him listed in the 1267 UNSC Sanctions Committee. Do you see China being cornered on this issue? Do you see it over a period of time seeing reason and dropping its resistance?
Well, on the 1267 committee, out of the 15 members, China is alone in defending the case on the technical hold on Masood Azhar case. So to that extent, China is isolated. But going by the previous experience, the historical experience since the 71 when China joined the United Nations Security Council and other bodies, it is very unlikely that the Chinese will budge on the 1267 Committee on Masood Azhar. Number one, they were having a deal with the Pakistanis on as long as the ISI of Pakistan and the army are conducive for the Chinese in their Uyghur countering the Uyghur resistance in Xinjiang. To that extent, the Chinese are happy with the whole issue, and they are willing to shield Pakistan on many counts, not just on Masood Azhar, but also in the NSG related issue.
Absolutely. But staying on Masood Azhar, China has been repeatedly claiming that it requires a solid evidence against Masood Azhar for it to support sanctions against him at UNSC. And India has been constantly maintaining that if there is solid evidence, which China also accepts, that exists against Jaish-e-Mohammed that has already been sanctioned by the UNSC, then why not Maulana Masood Azhar? Is that a strong contention that India has put forth time and again? Or repeatedly?
It's true. The Indian side had maintained that there is well-documented evidence regarding Masood Azhar. In any case, he was arrested, he was put in jail before, and there is substantial evidence even in India, and if not in other places, if they are not willing to kind of scan through all this. In any case, I think the Chinese response is related to the argument is objective, professional, and evidence. So, I mean, many of these have actually been very well documented. To that extent, I think the Chinese are basically losing the soft power in many of the places. In the International Coalition on Counterterrorism, there is a consensus among the many countries on if you have some evidence related to terrorist incidents, etc., immediately freezing of the financial assets or banning travel, visa, and various
that
other.
will be the result of the UNSC Sanctions Committee listing of Masood Azhar.
Exactly. So to that extent, I think the Chinese are shielding Pakistan in this regard.
But since you are saying that the sentiment against terrorism is growing in the international community, in these changed circumstances, and the circumstances have changed over the past 1.5 to 2 years, do you expect China to continue to hold out, or do you expect it to give in with time, sooner or later?
That's because the Chinese red lines are related to Xinjiang. Chinese red lines are not linked to India-Pakistan relations on terrorism. Although all the joint statements between India and China have mentioned that the security concerns of each other should be respected, which includes on terrorism. More specifically, they also said all forms of terrorism will be countered. The joint statements last 12-13 years of joint statements between India and China have been regularly documenting
Will
this.
China move beyond these platitudes?
I do not think so, because the national interest of China suggests that they back the Pakistanis.
Okay. On the issue of the NSG membership, Professor Kondapalli, India has said that China has a particular view as far as processes and procedures in the NSG is concerned. We do not agree with it, and majority of the members of the NSG do not agree with it. In other words, India implied that China is a minority, or perhaps the only holdout country in the NSG as far as India's membership is concerned. Do you expect China again to moderate its stand with time? Because China has supported India insofar as SCO membership is concerned, but we haven't seen that kind of sentiment in China as far as India's NSG membership is concerned.
Well, on the SCOs, we applied for membership in 2004, and we are getting it in 2016-17.
It's still impending.
It's still pending because there are procedural issues that have to be sorted out. Although in the previous 2016, formally it has been admitted, but there are some procedures to convince all the SCO members. Anyway, so 2004 to 16-17 was the SCO. It took so long a time. So one of the lessons we can draw is NSG will take similarly so much time in terms of getting the membership in NSG.
And can India's credentials as far as nuclear non-proliferation is concerned be equated with that of Pakistan? Because China has been trying assiduously behind the scenes to push for the case of Pakistan if India were to get NSG membership.
Indeed.
Can their credentials be equated?
Indeed, that is what the Chinese game plan is. In 2008, April and November, when the NSG and IAEA discussions took place on the clean waiver under the 123 agreement between US and India, when this issue came up, the Chinese position is that the clean waiver should not be discriminatory, meaning that Pakistan should also be given membership in the NSG. Number two, India has to sign the NPT, CTBT and FMCT arms control and disarmament treaties. Obviously, India will not sign NPT, CTBT and FMCT, which means basically India has to give up its nuclear option, which India will not do it if the other countries have not have a roadmap for universal disarmament. India will also not do.
Since we're running out of time, Professor Kondapalli, a quick comment on the CPEC project. India has repeatedly maintained and conveyed its concern in the past also to China, and it has been reiterated this time today by S. Jaishankar, that this is an issue of sovereignty because it's Pakistan-occupied Kashmir that CPEC will be going through, and this is illegally occupied Indian territory by Pakistan. Do you see a future for CPEC?
Since this is a flagship project of the One Belt, One Road, the CPEC is a flagship project, and President Xi Jinping announced this project in April 2015 in Islamabad. It indicates that the Chinese have already decided about the CPEC projects, regardless of the concerns expressed by India.
But can we build enough international diplomatic pressure on China and Pakistan to desist from going ahead with it?
I think the only high cost for the Chinese in this regard is the very unfortunate incidents of terrorist activity on the Chinese workers and technicians and engineers working in these hydroelectricity projects or road construction projects or railway projects in these areas.
But for that, some 15,000 military personnel have been deployed by Pakistan for the CPEC project.
It's true, but these are sentiments. These are basically the Gilgit-Baltistan national liberation movements, and in Baluchistan they have in fact today there was a demonstration in London.
There has been persistent resistance, you're right. On the issue of trade imbalance, your quick comment on the fact that India has today said that whatever efforts China has made to check the trade deficit, and there is a huge trade deficit to the tune of $53 billion US, do you, India has been quite plain today in saying that those efforts have not shown the kind of results that India would have expected. Do you see this changing over time?
Well, the Chinese have been expressing that they will change this, but since May 2010, when President Pratibha Patil raised this issue for the first time on trade deficits, since then we are now in 2017. Till this time we already lost something like $356 billion from 2007 to 16. So in other words, while we have received something like $3.2 billion of investment so far from China, we have lost some $356 billion in trade deficits. Well, Mr. Jaishankar's comments in relation to this issue is that last 1 or 2 years there has been some progress. Indeed, it is because of the Vanta group suggesting to building up some real estate or other industries which have now been coming up as the manufacturing zones in Pune and Ahmedabad. We see some change in the last 1.5 years, but not to the extent of what President Xi Jinping promised in 2014 of nearly $4 billion a year. From 2014 till now, it is only $1.2 billion investment.
So it's a long way to go. It remains to be seen whether these prickly issues will be sorted out with time as we continue to collaborate on a number of issues as far as multilateral issues are concerned, and we continue to agree to talk on all the prickly bilateral issues. Thank you so much, Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, for having joined us on Newsnight tonight.